Okay, so now we're going to begin the last part of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 40 to 48, the last 9 chapters. Of course, chapters as we have numbered them. Ezekiel himself didn't divide his book into chapters. This is all one long section, and it's all about one long vision. And it is a vision, it is a vision about a perfect future Jerusalem. Actually, the city is not actually called Jerusalem in this vision, although that's clearly what's being depicted, although it doesn't actually use that term. But we have to remember, and this equates, like I said, to the end of Revelation, after the invasion of Gog and Magog, and after the final judgment of all sin. And that is what Ezekiel is depicting here. However, we have to understand that Ezekiel is seeing this vision still from the perspective of a 6th century BC Hebrew priest. So in his vision of this glorious, perfect future, he sees Israel, land of Israel itself, and he sees a temple, and he sees an altar, and he sees sacrifices being offered, and he sees a prince ruling the people, not a king, not the Messiah king, but just a regular human prince. And that's what he sees. Excuse me. I just ate. I had leftovers from Thanksgiving. Today's the day after Thanksgiving. I had leftovers from Thanksgiving, so some of the turkey pieces are still in there somewhere probably. So that is what he is seeing. He is seeing a vision of this perfect ideal. I guess I really probably shouldn't use the word perfect. But he is seeing a vision of this idealized Jerusalem, this idealized temple system, the idealized land. He's going to see a vision of a new division of the land. The tribal inheritances are going to be redone, and they're going to go into new spots on their land allotments. There's going to be a huge temple sitting right there in the middle. And it's going to be great and glorious and magnificent and mighty. And that is what he sees. That is how he sees an idealized Jerusalem, an idealized future. And he's going to, of course, be telling this to the people. He is still in exile. The people around him are still in exile. And this is the picture he is going to be painting for them. In his view, and in their view, this is an idealized future. Now again, this equates to the end of Revelation, a picture of the new heavens and the new earth. And we're going to skip to that as we go through this section here and get John's perspective on what the new future looks like. And that is a post-cross perspective. Revelation was written in the 90s AD, after Jesus lived and died and rose again and ascended into heaven and became king of the world after the church was formed. And so there's a perspective that John brings on what the new creation will look like that Ezekiel doesn't have. Ezekiel's perspective is still very much rooted in the Old Testament Hebrew system. So he is depicting this glorious future from the perspective of a mid-6th century BC Hebrew priest. Ezekiel would not have understood it if you tried to talk to him about a future, a glorious, perfect future that didn't have a temple or didn't have a sacrificial system in place. He would not have understood that. In the book of Daniel, the next one we're going to read, we are going to see God is going to give Daniel a vision of the temple being removed. Okay, he is going to give Daniel a vision of what the age after the Jewish age looks like. And Daniel's not going to like it. Daniel's going to be sick to his stomach. He's going to be so knocked over by this vision, he's going to be weak and can't stand. So from Ezekiel's perspective, there is no idealized future without a temple and without sacrifices being offered. So he's going to see that in his vision. In the 25th year of our exile, so he started the countdown the year that Jehoiakim was taken captive into Babylon, which was 597 BC. Ezekiel was also taken captive into Babylon at that time. So that was by our calendars, that was 597 BC. So this is 25 years later, so this is about 572 BC. The city fell in 586 BC. So the city has been fallen now for about 14 years. In the 25th year of our exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th of the month, in the 14th year after the fall of the city. Now, in their system, by the way, just so we remember, excuse me, like I said, I've been kind of dry up there for a couple of weeks now. One of these days I'm going to get a Bible that has an actual front cover. Be a little bit easier to hold, don't you think? I'm going to try to get done with the Old Testament, well, except for the Book of Psalms. But I'm going to try to get through Ezekiel and Daniel and Haggai and Zechariah and Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther. That's my plan, but so the first month of the year, by the way, is when they had their Passover. Leviticus 23, at the beginning of the chapter, starting verse 4, actually. These are the Lord's appointed feasts, the sacred assemblies you are to proclaim at their appointed times. The Lord's Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. So this is during the Passover time, when he's having this vision. Or just before, at least. On that very day, the hand of the Lord was upon me, and he took me there to Jerusalem, to the fall of the city. In visions of God, he took me to the land of Israel, and set me on a very high mountain, on whose south side were some buildings that looked like a city. I don't know which mountain exactly this is. He took me there. It may not be any real mountain. It may be just a vision. It may not even really be a real mountain. Who knows? He took me there, and I saw a man whose appearance was like bronze. He was standing in the gateway with a linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand. The man said to me, Son of man, or human, look with your eyes and hear with your ears. God is always trying to get people to see and hear. Remember Isaiah talking about people who would see but not see, and would hear but not really hear? Be ever seeing but never understanding, be ever hearing but never perceiving, or something along those lines. See with your eyes and hear. Not just your physical eyes, your physical ears. Not everybody can see with their eyes. Some people have eyes, literally, that don't see. Some people have ears that don't hear. So we're not talking about just seeing something, or just hearing something. We're talking about paying attention to something. We're talking about taking something to heart. Son of man, or human, look with your eyes and hear with your ears, and pay attention to everything I am going to show you. For that is why you have been brought here. Tell the house of Israel everything you see. Now, what we're in for here is a description of a temple. Like I said, Ezekiel's vision of an idealized future has to have a temple in it. When we get to Revelation, we're going to find out there actually is no temple in the future heavens and earth. Because God himself is the temple, and he's everywhere. God's dwelling place is everywhere. God no longer needs a temple to dwell in. Ezekiel doesn't understand that, though. John will understand that. By 100 AD, when John is writing, or thereabouts, he understands that. 572 BC, when Ezekiel's seeing this vision, he doesn't understand that yet. He saw a vision of God leaving the temple earlier, but he has to see a vision of God coming back to the temple. That's what's going to happen here. It's like that's what Ezekiel needs to see. It's not what John needed to see, but it is what Ezekiel needs to see. So tell the house of Israel. So this is going to go back to, remember those sections in Exodus, second half of the book of Exodus, when we got all that description of the tabernacle and the stuff they used to make it, how they made it, and the priest's clothes, and the Ark of the Covenant, and the table, and the altar, and all that. And then in Chronicles and Kings, we read about them doing the same thing again for the temple. We got another batch of that. Okay, this is some dry reading we're in for. This is going to be some long and dry text, but we got to get through it. We got through those sections. We can get through this one. The difference is that this was never actually built. The tabernacle was built. The Ark of the Covenant was built. The temple was built. This temple was never actually built. When they do go back to the land 40 years from now and they build a temple, they're not going to follow these blueprints. They're not going to follow these measurements. Well, this is an enormous temple. We're going to be reading, of course, about cubits and all that, and we'll see in the footnotes how long that is. But just keep in mind that this temple that they're going to be talking about is extremely large, and no temple is actually as big as this temple is. And the temple that they did end up building 60 years later from now was not this. This is not the blueprint they used to build their next temple. I saw a wall completely surrounding the temple area. The length of the measuring rod in the man's hand was 6 long cubits, each of which was a cubit and a handbreadth. That's about 20 inches, but I'm not really going to bother with the measurements too much. He measured the wall. It was 1 measuring rod thick and 1 rod high. Then he went to the gate facing east. Remember, the east was the most important direction. They oriented themselves around the east. The tabernacle and the temple both faced east. Whenever the tabernacle was set up, because it was movable, they could take it down and move it and set it up again somewhere. It always was set up facing east. The temple faced east. East is the most important direction. And it goes from east to south to west to north. So east is the most important direction, and north is the least important direction. Now today, north is our most important direction. All of our compasses and our orientation is oriented to the north today. That is not the case it was. That is not how it was in Israel this time. So he went to the gate facing east. That's the most important one. He climbed its steps and measured the threshold of the gate. It was 1 rod deep. The alcoves for the guards were 1 rod long and 1 rod wide, and the projecting walls between the alcoves were 5 cubits thick. And the threshold of the gate next to the portico facing the temple was 1 rod deep. Then he measured the portico of the gateway. It was 8 cubits deep, and its jambs were 2 cubits thick. The portico of the gateway faced the temple. Inside the east gate were 3 alcoves on each side. The 3 had the same measurements, and the face of the projecting walls on each side had the same measurements. Then he measured the width of the entrance to the gateway. It was 10 cubits, and its length was 13 cubits. In front of each alcove was a wall 1 cubit high, and the alcoves were 6 cubits square. Then he measured the gateway from the top of the rear wall of one alcove to the top of the opposite one. The distance was 25 cubits from one parapet opening to the opposite one. He measured around the faces of the projecting walls all around the inside of the gateway, 60 cubits. The measurement was up to the portico facing the courtyard. The distance from the entrance of the gateway to the far end of its portico was 50 cubits. The alcoves and the projecting walls inside the gateway were surrounded by narrow parapet openings all around, as was the portico. The openings all faced inward. The faces of the projecting walls were decorated with palm trees. Remember how in the tabernacle and in the temple they had decorations of plants everywhere? They had pomegranates and other kinds of plants that were worked into the decorations of the and even their candle, their menorah, was even shaped like the tree of life. And they had cherubs, of course, also. So the idea always was supposed to be bringing to mind that when people entered this area, they were going back to the garden, because the garden had plants, the garden had cherubs at the end. And so the imagery that the temple featured was designed to remind people that when they're coming to this temple, they're coming back through the garden, back to God's dwelling place. And that's still the case here. This temple has decorations of palm trees and cherubs too. Then he brought me into the outer court. There I saw some rooms and a pavement that had been constructed all around the court. There were 30 rooms along the pavement. It abutted the sides of the gateways and was as wide as they were long. This was the lower pavement. Then he measured the distance from the inside of the lower gateway to the outside of the inner court. It was 100 cubits on the east side as well as on the north. Then he measured the length and width of the gate facing north, leading into the outer court. Excuse me. Its alcoves, 3 on each side, its protecting walls, and its portico had the same measurements as those of the first gateway. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. Its openings, its portico, and its palm tree decorations, so again more palm trees, had the same measurements as those of the gate facing east. 7 steps led up to it, with its portico opposite them. There was a gate to the inner court facing the north gate, just as there was on the east. He measured from one gate to the opposite one. It was 100 cubits. Then he led me to the south side, and I saw a gate facing south. He measured its jambs and its portico, and they had the same measurements as the others. The gateway and its portico had narrow openings all around, like the openings of the others. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. 7 steps led up to it, with its portico opposite them, and had palm tree decorations on the faces of the protecting walls on each side, so more palm trees. The inner court also had a gate facing south, and he measured from this gate to the outer gate on the south side. It was 100 cubits. You'd probably be better off, honestly, looking at an image or a diagram of this temple. I can't do that. I'm not going to draw it out. Someone else has to do that. Then he brought me into the inner court through the south. A lot of Bibles would have, now this one does not, but a lot of Bibles would have a diagram of this temple in them so you could see it. This one doesn't, but I would recommend you look up a diagram or a blueprint or a floor plan of this temple. Because it's going to make more sense if you can see it than just me reading it like this. Then he brought me into the inner court to the south gate, and he measured the south gate. It had the same measurements as the others. Its alcoves, its protecting walls, and its portico had the same measurements as the others. The gateway and its portico had openings all around. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. The porticos and the gateways around the inner court were 25 cubits wide and 5 cubits deep. Its portico faced the outer court. Palm trees decorated its jambs, and 8 steps led up to it. Then he brought me to the inner court on the east side, and he measured the gateway. He had the same measurements as the others. Its alcoves, its projecting walls, and its portico had the same measurement as the others. The gateway and its portico had openings all around. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. Its portico faced the outer court. Palm trees decorated the jambs on either side, and 8 steps led up to it. Then he brought me to the north gate and measured it. It had the same measurements as the others, as did its alcoves, its protecting walls, and its portico, and it had openings all around. It was 50 cubits long and 25 cubits wide. Its portico faced the outer court. Palm trees decorated the jambs on either side, and 8 steps led up to it. A room with a doorway was by the portico in each of the inner gateways, where the burnt offerings were washed. Remember, if you have a temple, you have to have offerings. Ezekiel is not ready to conceive of a future idealized Israel without a temple and without offerings. So God is not showing him a vision like that. Now, John will be ready for that. When John comes along, he'll be ready to see a vision of the future without a temple in it. But Ezekiel is not. Ezekiel wants there to be a temple. His temple was destroyed, and he wants another one. He wants there to be a temple. So God is showing him an idealized version of the future, vision of the future, and to Ezekiel that has to have a temple in it. In the portico of the gateway were 2 tables on each side, on which the burnt offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings were slaughtered. Remember those? Go back to Leviticus. Remember, Ezekiel was a priest, or he was supposed to be at least. So he is interested in priestly things. He is focused on the sorts of things that priests are focused on. So he's focused on the temple, and he's focused on the things that are done in the temple, such as offering sacrifices. By the outside wall of the portico of the gateway, near the steps of the entrance to the north gateway, were 2 tables, and on the other side of the steps were 2 tables. So there were 4 tables on one side of the gateway and 4 on the other, 8 tables in all, on which the sacrifices were slaughtered. There were also 4 tables of dressed stone for the burnt offering, each a cubit and a half long, a cubit and a half wide, and a cubit high. On them were placed the utensils for slaughtering the burnt offerings and the other sacrifices, and double-pronged hooks each a handbreadth long, were attached to the walls all around, I guess to hang the meat, I guess, I don't know, or hang the offerings. The tables were for the flesh of the offering. Outside the inner gate, within the inner court, were 2 rooms at the side, one at the side of the north gate and facing south, and another at the side of the south gate and facing north. He said to me, by the way, we never did see a west gate. The west side of the temple will be the back of the temple, so presumably it doesn't have a gate back there. The room, so he said to me, this angel figure measuring this stuff, said to me, the room facing south is for the priests who have charge of the temple, and the room facing north is for the priests who have charge of the altar. These are the sons of Zadok, who are the only Levites who may draw near to the Lord to minister before him. So only the Zadok priests can be the special priests. That was a guy who was around back in the days of David and Solomon, Zadok. He sided with Solomon way back here, and Second Kings, First Kings actually, and Second Chronicles. I sometimes get those tongue-tied. Oops. Solomon had to deal with some rebellions early in his reign, at the beginning of his reign actually. And let's see here. And Abiathar the priest sided with Adonijah, and Zadok the priest sided with Solomon, who was the one that David wanted and the one that God wanted to be king, not Adonijah. So Zadok now becomes the head of the new, chosen line of priests. These are the sons of Zadok, who are the only Levites who may draw near to the Lord to minister before him. Then he measured the court. It was square, 100 cubits long and 100 cubits wide, and the altar was in front of the temple. Okay, this is getting kind of long. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and read through chapter 41. See if I can get through the temple section here. He brought me to the portico of the temple and measured the jambs of the portico. They were 5 cubits wide on either side. The width of the entrance was 14 cubits, and protecting walls were 3 cubits wide on either side. The portico was 20 cubits wide and 12 cubits from front to back. It was reached by a flight of stairs, and there were pillars on each side of the jambs. Then the man brought me to the outer sanctuary and measured the jambs, the width of the jambs. The width of the jambs was 6 cubits on each side. The entrance was 10 cubits wide, and the projecting walls on each side of it were 5 cubits wide. He also measured the outer sanctuary. It was 40 cubits long and 20 cubits wide. Then he went to the inner sanctuary and measured the jambs of the entrance. Each was 2 cubits wide. The entrance was 6 cubits wide, and the projecting walls on each side of it were 7 cubits wide. And he measured the length of the inner sanctuary. It was 20 cubits, and its width was 20 cubits across the end of the outer sanctuary. He said to me, "This is the most holy place." That's where the ark would go, if they still had an ark at this point in time. Then he measured the wall of the temple. It was 6 cubits thick, and each side room was around the temple was 4 cubits wide. The side rooms were on 3 levels, one above another, 30 on each level. There were ledges all around the wall of the temple to serve as supports for the side rooms, so that the supports were not inserted into the wall of the temple. The side rooms all around the temple were wider at each successive level, so they got wider as you went up. The structure surrounding the temple was built in ascending stages, so that the rooms widened as one went upward. The stairway went up from the lowest floor to the top floor through the middle floor. I saw the temple had a raised base all around it, forming the foundation of the side rooms. It was the length of the rod, 6 long cubits. The outer wall of the side rooms was 5 cubits thick. The open area between the side rooms of the temple and the priest rooms was 20 cubits wide, or all around the temple. There were entrances to the side rooms from the open area, one on the north, another on the south, and the base adjoining the open area was 5 cubits all around. The building facing the temple courtyard on the west side, so there was a building somewhere in the back, was 70 cubits wide. The wall of the building was 5 cubits thick all around, and its length was 90 cubits. We never find out what this building was for. It was just randomly there for some reason. Then he measured the temple. It was 100 cubits long, and the temple courtyard and the building with its walls were also 100 cubits long. The width of the temple courtyard on the east, including the front of the temple, was 100 cubits. Then he measured the length of the building facing the courtyard at the rear of the temple, including its galleries on each side. It was 100 cubits. The outer sanctuary, the inner sanctuary, and the portico facing the court, as well as the thresholds, the narrow windows and galleries around the three of them, everything beyond and including the threshold was covered with wood. The floor, the wall to the windows, and the windows were covered. In the space above the outside of the entrance to the inner sanctuary and on the walls at regular intervals, all around the inner and outer sanctuary, were carved cherubim and palm trees. There's another clear reference of the imagery to the garden. Palm trees alternated with cherubim. Each cherub had 2 faces. The face of a man toward the palm tree on one side, and the face of a lion toward the palm tree on the other. So we now know something of what these cherubs look like. When we first heard about the cherub way back in Genesis, we didn't get any kind of description of what it looked like. When we heard about the cherubim that they built into the decorations of the tabernacle in Exodus and the Ark of the Covenant, we didn't get an indication of what they looked like either. They had wings. But now Ezekiel has seen it. He's not seen just the representations of them that decorated the temple. He would have been familiar with those. He spent the first 25 years of his life in Jerusalem, and he was trained to be a priest, so he would be familiar with the decorations of the temple. He would know what the cherubim on the temple walls looked like. But when he saw the actual real cherubim, when God came to him in that vision twice, at the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, once in Ezekiel 1 and again in Ezekiel 8, about a year later, he finally realized, well, this is what this thing, those things that we made that depict these, those depictions that we made, that we put in the temple, like that's what these things are depicting. Here we get a description that these depicted cherubim have 2 faces. We've already read that they have 4. Here they have 2. The face of a man, the face of a lion. They were carved all around the whole temple. From the floor to the area above the entrance, cherubim and palm trees were carved on the wall of the outer sanctuary. So even in this vision of an idealized temple that was never actually built, we still have this imagery that refers to the garden. There's always been, like God's desire has always been to live with his people in this garden, this pristine environment that provides for every need and is abundant and beautiful and bountiful, and God and his people will dwell there together. That's always been his desire. It will always be his desire. That's what he wants to do. It's the world he wants to make. The outer sanctuary had a rectangular door frame, and the one at the front of the most holy place was similar. There was a wooden altar 3 cubits high and 2 cubits square. Its corners, its base, and its sides were of wood. The man said to me, "This is the table that is before the Lord." Both the outer sanctuary and the most holy place had double doors. Each door had 2 leaves, 2 hinged leaves for each door. And on the doors of the outer sanctuary were carved cherubim and palm trees, like those carved on the walls, and there was a wooden overhang on the front of the portico. On the side walls of the portico were narrow windows of palm trees carved on each side. The side rooms of the temple also had overhangs. Okay, that's enough of that video.